This is Saturday, 2 days before Memorial Day. This is a therapy session for me. Every one of my videos, because I have no contact with the outside world. I don't have any friends, not one close friend around me. And I don't have much family around me, and they're all so busy. And I have no desire to have anything to do with my neighbors, the community I live in, or anything like that. I am I'm going to try to give you. I just got done watching a video made by Larry Capetto. He does historical videos. He interviews people from Vietnam, combat veterans from Vietnam. He's been doing it at least for 10 years. And he gets these veterans to really open up. I've seen him interview veterans where the veterans are almost asleep, but once he gets them to talking and refreshes their memory and takes an interest, these men wake up and they're right back in the jungle. They become alive because they had experiences that will last them until they go to the grave. Now, this is my story. And I wasn't a flag-waving Semper Fi Marine when I got out of the Marine Corps in May of '72. I just wanted to get out. I wanted to get back into society. I had been either overseas or below the Mason-Dixon line, Mason-Dixon line, for 4 years, except for the 9 months or so I spent in El Toro, California at that base. But I got out, and my story is so similar to what I just watched, one of Larry Capetto's films that was shot a couple months ago. And he's interviewing all these veterans who are my age. These are my brothers, my family, my demographic. They were all born in the leading edge of the baby boomers. They were either born during the war, Second World War, or they were the leading edge of the baby boomers. I figure anybody right now that's 70 or younger never, ever worried about being drafted. My generation of baby boomers, we were scrambling, especially after Tet. I have very cynical opinions about the way I was drafted. I have a cynical opinion about the way the draft is being portrayed on all the internet sites. I feel there was a conspiracy during Vietnam that after President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, he was on the hot seat where every Southern Democrat, anybody who was a white supremacist, didn't like what Johnson did. Even if they were a Yankee, a Northern Yankee. But Johnson made up for it. The reason I feel Kennedy was killed, he didn't want to go into Vietnam. And Johnson, if you read and watch any YouTube videos on the Gulf of Tonkin, it was like the way Hitler started World War II. He went into Poland, his men, and faked an attack by Polish people on Polish military on the Germans, and that gave him just cause to go into Poland. Same thing with President Johnson in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Maddox, that ship, they never got attacked. It was so vague and ambiguous, but Johnson was all set up to start bombing North Vietnam and start a war. And the reason is let me try to tell you the demographic and why I question the draft in Vietnam. If you go to any YouTube or search and you put in Vietnam draft, it usually comes up, the main one is lottery draft. That it was a lottery. It was fair, it was square. Only people that, there was no, what I want to call selective enforcement of the draft. Before the lottery, the draft was made up, like in New York, every county in New York had their own draft board. Every county in New York had its own draft board, and probably similar down south. Every county, every little town, every little municipality had a draft board made up of local pillars of the community. Doctors, lawyers, businessmen, might even had clergy involved. All your different lodges, the Kiwanis, the Elks, the Masons, whatever, the KSC, those type of people made up the board. And the reason they were given that power is the Selective Service says you're the most intimate with your county, so that you're going to be the one who selects who goes. Now, when you get drafted, and back then it was like you got a 30-day notice. This is one of my notices right here. This was the first notice. And it came out of the draft board out of Ticonderoga. And it was followed up by another letter that was more specific. This one more or less said, you've been drafted, and we'll come up with the details later. And a second letter showed up a few days later, and it said, you have 30 days on May 30th of yada yada date, you will report for induction into the military. This wasn't a lottery. Okay? And up until the December of 1969, for 4 or 5 years, this is how everyone was drafted, by a local draft board that was familiar with who was who in the county. And if you were on somebody's bad side, or you were an outsider, or politically, it could even be that your father doesn't buy cars from one of the guys on the draft board. And he has to make a choice between you, who your father will never buy a car from him, and the son of somebody that buys a car from him every 2 years. Buys a brand new car every 2 years. Which one you think he's going to draft? All right? Or if someone on the draft board, their son, which was usually so academic and so scholarly and so out of the loop that the girls really didn't fall for him. Okay? He was too important to play sports because he might get hurt. So the girl fell in love with the guy from across the tracks. The guy that doesn't have anything. But he's got a great personality. He's a star athlete. He can dance. He's good looking. But he doesn't have the status of the son of the man on the draft board. And the son of the man on the draft board is deeply in love with this girl, and she talks to him, but the big problem is the other guy is in the way. She'll never look at me ever as long as he's in town. Things like that happen. And down south, it gave all the people running these towns and down south, anybody that they suspected that was going to give them trouble at their civil rights. They had just been granted civil rights. If they expect civil rights, we got to get rid of them. And there was disproportionately drafted black people from many, many counties. Disproportionately drafted. And the white kids all had notes from their doctor. Plus, we had the student deferment. You could take basket weaving in college, okay? If you were in college, you didn't have to go. You had a college deferment. You got one shot at a college deferment. If you dropped out, it was lost. And as soon as you dropped out of college, everybody knew about it. You were being watched. Everybody in the community were watching you. And in my case, I had a college deferment, but I wasn't prepared for college at the time. And I got in a curriculum that was way over my head. So at the end of my first semester, I had like 3 term papers due and 3 deep courses. I think it was zoology, another one was English lit, English, and another one might have been, I don't know, whatever, one of the courses. But I had 3 term papers due, and I hadn't even started them. I went to my department head and I said, look, how about letting me out, and so I can leave in good standing? And he did. He let me volunteer to leave, and he says it isn't going to affect if you want to come back to college again and apply, you can. You're leaving in good standing. Well, I immediately went to the Navy recruiter, and I figure maybe I'll join the Navy. And I've dropped out of college, I'll join the Navy. And this was around January of '68. January of '68 is when I dropped out. Well, I had a chance of going in the Navy. I took the test, that initial test. I scored, I think, a 94 on it. That first test you take, everybody takes it when you go to the AFI station. Well, what came after that, what kind of saved me from going into the Navy, is New York started this state program where they would give people money to go and apply at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft in East Hartford, Connecticut. Pratt & Whitney Aircraft was gearing up for this huge contract from the Pentagon, and they needed people, and New York State would give $300 to anybody who would go down to East Hartford. So I took that option. I went down and I interviewed, and they made me a sheet metal assembler. They hired me. I had to live in this attic apartment with this old Greek restaurateur. He was retired. He was Greek. He had a Greek wife. She didn't speak a word of English. I had to go through their kitchen to get to the attic, so I saw him every time I came and left. He used to love to have me watch TV with him. He adopted me like a son. But for about 3 months, I worked at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, and for the first 2 weeks I was there, they sent me to a school where every night on graveyard I had to go over into Hartford And if anybody knows where the Travelers building is in Hartford, it's on stilts. It's a football-shaped, elliptical shape, and it sits up on stilts above the ground. I used to be fascinated by it. I used to have to walk by it every night to go to this school for sheet metal assembly, where they taught me different rivets, metallurgy, and the most important thing was the vernier scale and all the different tools for sheet metaling, and the vernier scale. So it was a lot of intense training, people really dedicated. And then I went into the factory at Pratt & Whitney for about 2.5 months. And I worked in that Pratt & Whitney factory, and they had drawn people like me from all over New England. There was ex-construction workers, ex-this kind of worker, ex-welders, whatever. If you were a body, you filled the hole. And Pratt & Whitney was hiring, and it was swoop. On the weekend, everybody would jump in their car and go back to wherever they came from, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine, and then they'd come back the next week to work at Pratt & Whitney. Well, I found out after having a little bit of college that I don't want to do this the rest of my life. There's no way I want to do this the rest of my life. I mean, when we were waiting in line to punch out, here's all these World War II veterans, Korean veterans. They've got a pail under their arm, and they're like little kids in a schoolyard. They're pinching each other, grab-assing each other, joking each other, cutting the line on each other. And I looked and I said, I don't want to wait, and I don't want to earn my living like this the rest of my life like these guys. They're acting like kids, all right? And they're just happy as clowns that they got a job that pays them for 8 hours a day, okay? So I reapplied to go back to the college, and they accepted me. Only I applied for business. I got out of the curriculum I was in. Well, I know more got back, and I left Pratt & Whitney. For one thing, I was a New Yorker. We could drink at 18 in New York. I started drinking in bars in New York at 16 years old. We had bars in my hometown, and there was bars throughout the county. If you could find the bar late at night, they'd serve you. And I had my height, I had my weight. And like I said, the age was 18. They looked the other way. If you were quiet, you went in the back room, you didn't make any noise. They could count on you being out of sight, out of mind. They'd serve you. Well, it wasn't like that in Connecticut. Connecticut was 21 to drink. I had no social life. The only social life I had was with this Greek man and his wife. And she'd watch TV with him, like these game shows or news. She didn't understand a thing they were saying on TV. He barely did. And he used to say things, and she didn't understand a thing he was saying to me. But he was a hard-nosed Greek. I thought the world of him, Charlie Samiotis. And he had another guy who worked for National Cash Register living in the basement. So he was renting to this guy in the basement and renting to me in the attic. And the guy in the basement was probably, if you ever see the show Mad Men, he was a madman. He was about 27 or 28. All right. Had a job with National Cash Register. Doing very well. Single. Smart, intelligent. And I got to know him. But when I got accepted back at college, the same college, I said, I'm out of here. I don't want to do this. And besides Pratt & Whitney, they're machining all day long. They're machining. they're boiling oil, this boiled solvent. Every time a process happens to a part could have 1,000 hours of labor on it. You get one of these rings that goes in an engine, and they machined it, they worked on it, it's got 500 or 1,000 hours of work on it, and they give it to you, and you got to drill like 15 holes in it, and they have to be exact, go and no go gauges. Well, every time that part got machined, the next step was to drop it into a boiling vat of solvent to get all the milling off it, all the milling oil, to send it to the tag it and send it to the next step. So your clothes reeked of oil and solvent. When you got home at night, your clothes reeked. You couldn't get away from the smell. And I had enough. I got accepted and I went back home. I wasn't home about a week, maybe after Tet. But during this period of time, the Tet Offensive went off at the end of January of 1968. I had just probably left Pratt & Whitney. Well, what happened after Tet is they were telling everybody, we're winning the war. We're almost done. We're winning. And all of a sudden Tet and they lost thousands of Americans in Tet. A lot of people killed. And instead of backing out, Johnson, well, first of all, Walter Cronkite, who was, like I said, he was the Messiah. He was the Word. Everybody trusted Walter Cronkite. He took his glasses off one night right after Tet, looked straight in the mirror and said, or into the camera and said, "This war is unwinnable. They've been lying to us. They almost wiped us out. We can't win this war." Well, that more or less planted a seed in everybody's mind in America. Planted a seed in everybody's mind in America. We're in a war we can't win, and the Pentagon isn't telling us the truth. If they would have told us the truth, this would have never happened. All right? The whole country turned upside down in one night during Tet. Well, Johnson, his next move is, we're not backing down. We're going to escalate. And he made the statement, I think, I may be wrong, but I think he made the statement, we're going to draft 75,000 people. I've ordered Selective Service to, in the next year or so, draft 75,000 people. Because we're not backing down. We're escalating. We're not going to cut and run just because of Tet. Well, that meant in about 2 weeks from that statement, or 3 weeks, the beginning of April, they put a bunch of us on the bus. Anybody that wasn't tied down, and especially young, right out of high school without a job and not in college, if you weren't in college and you were between 18 and 25 or 27 and you weren't connected to the draft board, if the draft board looked at you like, you're not one of us, we're not going to lose anybody if we send you. And some people, like new people in town, my family was brand new. I had no cousins, no uncles, or anything in town. No uncles, cousins, aunts, or anything. My mom and dad came to the town before World War II. He stayed through the war. And I was born right after. My sister was born during the war. I was born right after the war in 48. Well, we stayed. But we were considered outsiders. We weren't part of that tapestry of DNA that was woven through that community for the last 75 or 100 years. Where everybody, a tight little community where you got cousins, aunts, uncles. If you fight with one, you're going to have to fight with 30 of them. All right? So when it came time to send somebody down the road or sell them down the river, I was at the top of the list. But what got me on that list is in the beginning of April, they sent out to anybody who wasn't tied down, like I said, a letter that you're going to Albany for physicals and classification on this date. So on a day early in April of 1968, they put about 50 of us on a bus. And we all knew each other. We all grew up together. There were probably 2 or 3 schools, 4 schools had fed that bus with young men, 4 different high schools, but we all knew each other. It was very sociable when I was growing up. We had sometimes we'd have 3 dances a night. A dance here, a dance here, a dance there, all within 20 miles of each other. That we could go, and we all knew each other, and we all hitchhiked, and we all hung out a lot. So everybody on the bus more or less knew everybody. Okay? And they sent us to Albany, and 2 people on the bus stepped forward, and when they asked, has anybody got a note from your doctor? 2 people stepped forward. The note was taken out of their hands. They were ordered to get back onto the bus, to stay there. And they stayed on that bus for about 3 hours while the rest of us got treated like cattle. Stripped us down, examined us, went through our physically, checking our teeth, our mouth, our this, right? Our feet for being flat-footed. Then you have a little interview where you think why you wouldn't, and so that when you got back on the bus and went home, most of us were classified 1A. 1A. And they would draft in rounds. Like 1 week they'd draft, maybe 2 weeks later they'd draft again. And if you were on that bus and you were 1A, there's a good chance that within the next 2 or 3 months, they're going to exhaust the list and you're going to be gone. Well, I was one of the first ones drafted because I was an outsider. He's not part, he's a piece of lint on our tapestry here. All right, he isn't interwoven DNA-wise with anybody here or his family. So he's going first. Okay? That's the way I felt about it. And I've carried this resentment my whole life. I've kept quiet about it, but I know what took place. My mother told me, she says, of course you're going first. She goes, I know this town. I've been living here now about 25 years. I know what they're up against, what they're like here. They're clannish. Okay? Of course you're going first. Well, anyway, that meant 2 years being drafted into the Army. But because I was a street person, I was always out on the road with my ear to the ground, listening to scuttlebutt from other people. I was very much aware that they were drafting into the Marines in Albany. And I later found out in life, in 1967, the Marine Corps drafted 20,000 Marines into the Marine Corps. Guys thought they were going to be drafted in the Army. They went down to the AFI station to get sworn in, and the Marine recruiter would come out and say, every 5th guy step forward. Or if he liked the looks of you and you were athletic And he thought that you'd make a great Marine because you're in fit and shape. You're not a fat body. He might pick you for the Marines. And you got drafted in the Marines. And I was very aware of that. So, the day after I got my notice of being drafted, and the mood wasn't very good in my house that night. My mother was pissed. She couldn't do anything about it. We're going up against City Hall here. All right. So the next morning I get a call from the Navy recruiter. And the Navy recruiter gives me a spiel that if you get up here in the next 30 days, you don't have to go in the Army. And we'll get you into the Navy. And you can go from there, but you got to join for 4 years. That was a 40-mile drive for me to Saranac Lake, and I didn't have a car. So I hung up and I said, I'll see what I can do. 2 minutes later, a Marine recruiter calls me up. He's about 2 minutes away, and he's got two guys, one that I graduated with, another one that I went to school with. The one I graduated with, I've known since I was like in the second grade. He was in the second grade with me, I think. Second or third grade. All through high school, we graduated together. And the other fella was a year behind me. He had, so the Marine recruiter calls me and he says, I have two of your friends in the car, and I realize you've been drafted, but I want to give you some options. Can I come over and pick you up? And like the Navy recruiter, he says, you know, you have options. You can join the Marines, and if you want to talk to me, fine. Well, up to that point, I said, sure, why not? And my mother said, don't bring him in the house. I don't want him in the house. You go with them, but don't bring him here. So when he picked me up, the other two guys were in the car, and we went to one of the fellows' houses, spent about an hour there. His mother made coffee for us and got to know families, trying to schmooze and warm up to the family. And then we went to the other guy's house, same thing. Well, I'm out of the loop. I'm already drafted. Okay, so I'm gonna go, and that's it. But these fellas hadn't been drafted yet. And during all the negotiation, he convinced them that if you join, you're going to get the 120-day deferment. If you join for 2 years, you're only going to serve a year and 8 months. And you don't have to start serving for 120 days. And then he points to me and says, don't let this happen to you, what happened to this guy. This guy's been drafted. He's got to go at the end of the month. And these two guys, with a lot of negotiation, a lot of talking, going over the paperwork, and the recruiter promised everybody, whoever goes in for 2 years, you're going to be in Vietnam within a year. Maybe even less. You've got a direct ticket to Vietnam if you join for 2 years. I promise you. Well, he signed up one guy with the 120-day deferment, which I couldn't get because I had been drafted. And he scared those guys. He said, maybe next week you guys will be in the same boat as this guy here, and you're going to have to go, and you're not going to get that 120-day deferment. So one guy signed for 3 and one guy signed for 2, and here I am sitting there, and I've been reading nothing but brochures he had in his briefcase, And 2 or 3 of them were on the Marine Corps Air Wing. 4-year service, Marine Corps Air Wing. When he got to me, he says, you want to join? I said, nah, what's this Air Wing? He goes, you're going to be a flying leatherneck. You ever see the movie with John Wayne, Flying Leatherneck? You're going to be in the smallest Air Force in the world. The Marine Corps Air Wing. And you're not going anywhere until they send you to school. You have to go to school first before you go anywhere. And so I volunteered for it, and before he could sign me, because it was a special enlistment, a 4-year, he made a phone call to his head office and saying, he told me, says, we got a guy that wants the Air Wing, a 4-year enlistment. And when he got done talking, it was understood that if you want to go in the Air Wing, you got to leave in 3 days. You got to be sworn in on the 8th. Forget about that 30th date that's on your draft thing. If you want in the Air Wing, we got an opening where you can get in 3 days. So I signed. And he reminded me, like at first he said, that's 4 years. I don't care about the 4 years. That don't matter. I don't want to be in Vietnam within 6 months, okay? I don't want to go there right now. And because I'd had that little bit of aircraft experience with Pratt & Whitney, where I'd had a little bit of experience with tools, vernier calibration, all this other stuff, metallurgy, rivets, whatever, no-go, no-go gauges, I figured maybe I'd be a little bit up on the rest. And he told me, he says, they're going to test the hell out of you. And when they get done testing you, they're going to find out what's between your ears. And if there's enough there, the better position you're going to get. So 3 days later, my mother was putting me on a bus to Albany in Elizabethtown. She put me on a bus, an Adirondack Trailways bus, crying her eyes out. My father wasn't there. He got up that morning and went to work. The night before, he stuck his hand out, gave me a handshake. Well, son, good luck. See you later. Bye. And he walked to work the next morning. There was none of this, the whole family goes with me like they do now for being inducted. This was like falling off a log, okay? These fathers back then, the ones that had been through World War II and the Depression, they weren't coddling us. He got up, put his pail under his arm, he went to work. Later on that morning, she took me to Elizabethtown, put me on the bus. The next day, I was sworn in and ended up going to Paris Island. But this is my Memorial Day remembrance. It's my therapy to talk about this again, to remind me. But the film that I just saw with Larry Capetto was Vietnam veterans who are my age, who he interviewed about 15 of them that were all spit on, that nobody recognized their service. When they got back to the United States, they took their uniforms off to keep from being spit on in the airport. A lot of them were heartbroken. They tell the story. I have a similar story. Although I didn't go to Vietnam, after about 8 months of school, mess duty, and guard duty, I was either in school 8 hours a day or on mess duty or on guard duty. Seemed like for the first year and 9 months I was in. Year and 8 months, that's all I did. I was either in class or on a special detail. I did mess duty 3 times while I was in the service. The last two, it was 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 30 days. When you got on mess duty, don't plan on doing anything for a month except work. You're going to be at the mess hall at like 4:35 in the morning. You're not going to leave until 8 at night, if you're lucky. So a lot of time was burned up, and when I got to Okinawa, they had just pulled the 2 squadrons I was assigned to. When they cut my orders to go to Westpac and I was in El Toro, the 2 squadrons were in Vietnam. So I had orders to go to Vietnam, but I went home on leave for about 3 weeks, and then I had to go through staging. And the first thing that happened when I got to staging, they put me on guard duty for a month. So there goes another month ticked away. I'm on guard duty, and finally I go through staging, and that's about a month, 3 weeks to a month. So when I finally got to Okinawa, the planes a month or 2 months earlier had been pulled back to Iwakuni, Japan. They had been flown so hard in Vietnam, they were out of parts. These planes are maintenance hogs. Parts, every kind of part. And when you're flying them every day, lots of sorties, and you're flying them deferred, a lot of things aren't working, but they're flying anyway. Eventually, they had to pull them back to Iwakuni. They couldn't support them anymore there. And the Air Force came in and sort of took over. The Air Force and Navy took over from what those first Marine squadrons were doing in Vietnam. Well, the night before I was to be shipped out, I think we flew out of El Toro. We were given they trusted us enough to say, you be in El Toro tomorrow morning at this time to get on a plane to fly to Hawaii and then on to Okinawa. Well, a bunch of us who had been stationed at El Toro, I was stationed at El Toro about 60 or 90 miles up the road from Pendleton. We all got in one car, hitchhike or whatever. We got a ride, and I went up to El Toro to say goodbye to all my buddies that I hadn't seen in a couple of months since my orders were cut. I left them a couple months earlier, and now I'm back 3 months earlier. And now I'm back and I'm talking to them, and they're telling me, like, when you get to Okinawa, don't let them send you to Vietnam. The planes aren't in Vietnam. They're in Iwakuni. And what we've been having happen is guys with orders cut for Iwakuni or for these squadrons, they're sending them to Nam just to get more people in Nam. These grunts, these combat Marines, these infantry Marines, they really don't have much respect for air wingers, okay? Or they could care less whether you make it to your duty station or not. And we've lost 2 or 3 air wingers that ended up in Vietnam because they didn't stand up to them. And so I was ready. When we got off the plane in Okinawa, here was this fat, over 2 spare tires staff sergeant, which was the Marine Corps by that time, 1972, was lousy with NCOs. NCOs had done a couple of trips in Vietnam. They were back there. They knew they weren't going to ever go back there again. They had some cushy stateside duty. And this guy, his job was to get as many Marines that came off that plane to Vietnam as possible, no matter what their orders said. Well, I was ready for him, and when he called out my name, I went, yo, he goes, Vietnam. I said, nope, time out. Time out. And he started his bullying Marine ways, like they do to intimidate recruits. Most of the people, I would say 95% of the people that got off that plane with me in Vietnam were less than a year in the Marine Corps. They had just got out. They were pushed through the grinder. I had been in the Marine Corps for 2 years, almost 2 years, doing mess duty, guard duty, and every kind of shit duty there was. And I had a little bit of an attitude. So when he says, go to Vietnam, I said, nah, time out. I said, Marine, I said, I ain't going there. You read the order. Marine, I said, get over there. I'm not doing it. Time out. Read the orders. Well, what saved me, there was a warrant officer supervising everything or keeping an eye on everything. When he saw this little altercation between me and this guy, he walked up. Is there a problem? And as soon as the warrant officer was on his shoulder, the staff sergeant said, you, go over there for Iwakuni. Thank you very much. Okay? I risked going into the brig that night, but they had Uncle Sam had spent a lot of money in my training. I was a radar missile technician for an F-4 airplane. All right? If I would have got to Vietnam, they would have handed me a rifle. And with no training. No training. No infantry training. No hard-nosed infantry training like these other guys. Well, that night we all stayed in one area. I didn't have to get my shots. And I didn't get jungle utilities. So, God bless all those Marines that were on that plane with me that went to Vietnam. I'm sure a lot of them didn't make it back. I can't say enough about them. But that was in the morning, and in the evening when it was chow time, we all had to break out for chow in the same place. By that time, all these other Marines were having fashion shows with their new jungle utilities. They had their shots, their hemoglobin shots. I didn't get any shots. That was another thing. I didn't get any shots for Vietnam. I didn't get issued any jungle utilities. And a lot of these guys, they were proud of their jungle utilities. They were modeling them for each other and showing how nice they fit and stuff like that. And I truly admired them and thank God for them and God bless them. They all went to Vietnam, but I didn't. And when I got to Iwakuni, I got some real salty Vietnam veterans who were in my squadron. Some of those guys were in Vietnam for 9 or 10 months with the squadron. And they were real cocky. And salty. They'd been through it. Okay? I served in Iwakuni for almost a year. And I always get long-winded on these, but I wanted to make this, and I hope Larry Capretto is... let's see if I can find more stuff here that I can... This was my draft notice, though. This was the first one. And then the second one came in about a week or two later. They had all the specifics. But Ticonderoga, New York Draft Board. Okay. Now let's see. Here we go. This picture right here. This is my Paris Island boot camp picture. It's quite old. It's been beat up. My mother saved it. I wouldn't have it. Thank God for my mother. I wouldn't have it. But this picture was taken about 36 or 48 hours after I hit Paris Island. That hat's probably been in 10,000 pictures. That hat alone, and this is a smock. All it is something that'll cover your chest. they hook it in the back, but they put it on. It's for the pictures. But I was in shock. I was tripping like on acid by this time. Okay. I was doing psychedelics from Paris Island at this point. Okay. They had kept me up for about 48 hours. The sea bag drag, all the other bullshit, screaming and hollering at you. And I wasn't a Marine. I was a long way from being a Marine in this picture. And when they sent this picture home to my mother, I heard she cried. Because she could see how stressed out I was. Just the eyes alone, how stressed I was. Okay? Let's see if I have something else here. But that's my, like I said, that was taken about 48 hours after I hit Paris Island. A brutal 48 hours of no sleep, sea bag drag, forming up, head shaved, you name it. Okay? Alright, this right here, everybody gets one of these. This was given me on the 8th, 68. It's what it's saying, welcome to the Marine Corps. You have passed everything, you're qualified, you're in the Marine Corps now. What was this? Was, May 7th, 1968. Thank you for joining the Marine Corps. All right. Okay, this picture right here. This picture was taken in Iwakuni. This fellow right here, we played football together in high school. He was a halfback or an end. He was a person that handled the ball. He graduated a year before I did. He graduated in 66. I graduated in 67. And he was one of these fellows. He had been in Vietnam for about 9 months. And he rotated out of Vietnam with the squadron. And I saw where we were all in the same place as far as barracks. But one day he walked across where our barracks compound was, and I spotted him immediately. I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I didn't even know he'd been in the Marine Corps. We had a drum and bugle corps. Him and I were in the same drum and bugle corps together. We played football together. When we had a huddle, he stood right behind me to get the instructions from the quarterback. I remember whenever we were huddled, I was like the center or guard. He was a halfback or end behind me. So he stood behind me when he got the play from the quarterback. Okay. Name's Lynn. He isn't with us anymore. He's passed away. He's probably the same age as, would have been the same age as me, 75 and a half to 76. Great guy. Super nice guy. The ideal, I mean, the perfect citizen you'd want to come from your hometown. Okay? Just smart, friendly, respectful, honest, you name it. What a great guy. And I'm very proud of this picture. This was one of his. He was in one squadron, I was in the other. He was in 232. I was in 334. But I went over to visit him one day, and somebody had a camera. I might have been my camera, and they got a picture of us. But I'm very proud of this picture right here. Like I said, we played football together. And the Marine Corps Air Wing is so small. That's another thing about the Marine Corps Air Wing. It's small. When you go like the Millington, they start you out usually in Millington, Tennessee. And once you go through Millington, you're all eating at the same mess hall. You're all marching to school together. Some people have schools that are 2 weeks. Like me, I was there for something like 27 weeks of school that I had in Memphis. And you get to see a lot of personnel. In 27 weeks, if you're in Memphis for 27 weeks, and you're all eating at the same chow hall, and you're a small detachment of Marines for training, you get to see so many faces. And when you get out and when you party, we had a Navy club. We used to go to the Navy club every night, and a lot of girls from Memphis would show up at the Navy club, and they'd have a band playing. Usually had a band every night, and the girls come up and would dance with the sailors and the Marines. We were such a small detachment that, like I said, I was there for 27 months and an extra month, or 27 weeks, and an extra month on top of that on mess duty. So I got to see a lot of faces. But that's one thing about the Marine Corps Air Wing. When you're in the Air Wing, when you go to a base anywhere, you're going to run into somebody that you know, that you either served with, you went to school with, or whatever. Let's see what else we have here. Here's my DD 214. Right here, it says avionics fundamentals, 16 weeks. This one was radar school, 11 weeks. And then for the specific aircraft, F4J, 6 weeks. That would about 6 or 8 months of either guard duty or mess duty mixed in with them were the first 2 years of my Marine Corps experience. And right here it says $15,000. That's how much they were going to give me to re-up. And I spent 4 years. It says 68 or 63 to 67. That's high school. Here it is. It says 6238. $62.38 was my MOS. Aircraft radar technician, $62.38. Equivalent in civilian life, electrical engineer. Okay? I don't have any medals. The only medal I get to wear is that red and yellow National Defense Medal. I never qualified anything over marksman. I wasn't very good shot with a rifle, but I had a meritorious mass. And if I wasn't blind, I'd pull it up and try to read it, but I'm having trouble seeing lately. Somewhere I've got my boot camp picture in here. I can't find that picture. Here it is. This is my platoon. And I'm not in it. It's one of these things that fell through the cracks. I ended up getting set back in boot camp from this platoon. I had about 2 weeks left of training. We had just done mess duty at the Women's Marines Mess Hall. That's another thing. I got to do mess duty in Paris Island in the Lady Marine Mess Hall. Not very many people got to do that. But this was my platoon. I was with them for probably about 10 weeks, 9 or 10 weeks, doing everything. But then I came down with staph infection. If anybody knows what staph infection is, it's rampant through the military. I had carbuncles and these huge boils all over my legs and buttocks. I couldn't even sit down. It got to the point where I couldn't do anything. I had to report to this man, Staff Sergeant Aguilar. I had to tell him I can't go any further. These boils, I can't even sit down. I got huge carbuncle boils all over me, all over my legs and buttocks. So I got pulled out of this platoon. They put me in a medical platoon. And I got put in the ward for staph infection. And it was so sad. It was so sad. Some guys had holes at the bottom of their spine that had to be repacked. They got this staph infection in their spine. Some of them one guy had it on the top of his foot. Another one had it on their arm or elbow. And they had to be taken out. They had to be packed every night and then unpacked, swab it, and then repack it again. These people suffered. And I was fortunate enough to get a doctor because I had all these boils. They were just huge carbuncles all over. And the doctor, the first thing he said to me is, we'll schedule you and we'll lance all these tomorrow. And I tried to reason with him. I said, Doctor, can we wait and see how this progresses before you start lancing them? Can I start taking hot showers? And he said, well, I'm going to put you on antibiotics. The heaviest antibiotics I can put you on right now. We'll start you on those. And his schedule was so busy lancing boils like me that he let me slide for a day or two. So for about 2 days, I stood in hot water, hot showers, and I started taking the heavy-duty antibiotics. And within about a week, all the boils I was able to drain them. One that was in my scrotum, I drained it one day, I almost passed out. I got so much pus out of that. It's disgusting to think about, but this is what I went through. And so I spent about probably 2 weeks recovering in the hospital. And in that 2 weeks, I had missed the gas chamber. I had missed drown proofing and a couple other important things, finishing touches to my training with this platoon. So I've never been in this picture. And they send the picture and they send the platoon like yearbook, even though I'm not in this picture for the platoon, because this was taken just before they graduated. Okay? And I wasn't with them. But I want to tell you a story. And when I got out of the hospital, I got back to I think it was this man or an officer above him. When I reported back to that company, and I begged him, I said, please, let me graduate with my platoon. The guy says, you've missed too much. Well, what have I missed? He said, you've missed drown proofing and you've missed the gas chamber. And I said, well, I'm a great swimmer. And I was a great. He says, no. You're going to go through marine drown proofing and the gas chamber. So we're going to set you back to another platoon. So I got set back to another platoon. I graduated with another platoon. They weren't happy to see me because they were the most awarded platoon on the island. And here they were getting a new guy. about 2 weeks before they were supposed to graduate. So I went through drown proofing with them and the gas chamber with them. But I want to let you know, this fellow right here, this is Corporal Sampson. I don't think he ever saw combat. He was a wise... We used to roll our eyes at this guy. I mean, every one of us thought we could take his ass anytime in an alley fight. He was just a little... Every time I see Ron DeSantis, I see this guy. Because this guy was from Florida. And I want to tell you what happened. And probably one of the reasons that I got out of the Marine Corps. There was 3 or 4 things that happened, events that happened while I was in the Marines that I decided I'm not staying. One of them was that incident in Okinawa. I had a contract with the Marines to be an airplane mechanic, and this staff sergeant was ready to cancel it on the spot. If I'd been naive, dumb, one of these Marines that go, yes sir, no sir, yes sir, I would have done exactly what it said, and I'd be on the wall in Washington. But this Corporal Sampson, this wise little asshole, and that's what I call him, on the day, I think it was a Sunday morning, Robert Kennedy was killed the night before. And it was this guy's job to relieve the DI that spent the night with us. So he came in Sunday morning bright and early, and he started in. I got great news for you. You're going to be happy to hear that. I'm tickled. And he started in that MF, CS, yada, 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 pinko communist bastard Robert Kennedy who got killed last night. I'm tickled. You all should be tickled. That pinko communist bastard, that liberal. And he went on and on and on and on for about a half an hour. How he was so happy that they had assassinated Robert Kennedy. Tickled. And getting away with it. We were all sitting there, and in this platoon, because I had been with it, there was a lot of people in this platoon from New York and Massachusetts. There was a lot of people from New York in this platoon. And whether you like Kennedy or not, he was a New York senator. And to have this guy just belittle him, cheering to the top of his... And we, by that time, nobody dared to say anything. We all kept our eyes straight forward. Some of us, when he went by and he wasn't looking, we rolled our eyes at each other like we always did when he went into one of his rants, because he was a little prick. I don't know how he ever got to be a DI. He must have had some DNA connection or something that could put him there. But this guy, Sergeant Aguilar, this was a true Marine. He was a real Marine. He'd seen a lot of action in Vietnam. And he was a Marine. And I don't know what he thought of this guy, but they were 2 different Marines. This guy was a full Marine. This guy, I don't know what he was. How he got to where he was. Must have been political. And this guy over here had seen action because he had a scar up the side of his head that was took up most of his head, a big scar. So he'd been in action, he'd seen it. And this is the guy that used to choke me all the time. I must have reminded him of somebody he served with that he didn't like, because every chance he had to talk to me for any reason, he had his hands on my throat, choking me. to make sure I was listening. He'd think nothing of grabbing my throat and choking me while he was talking to me. And you knew better than to hit anybody. You knew better to not do anything. You knew better by that time that just sit and take it. To sit and take it, because if you strike back, you do anything, you're going to be out of there. You're going to be in some discipline platoon, like CCNR platoon, or the CP. They had a motivational platoon. They had another platoon that they could put you in. Okay, so you sit there and took it. And I had to let this guy choke me about twice a week for about 6 weeks. Like I said, he saw something in me that he didn't like. Maybe he was from down south and he saw me as a Yankee, a New York Yankee or whatever, or I wasn't paying attention, and since I was an air winger, I knew I wasn't going to be an infantry. Maybe he found out I was signed up for the air wing and he didn't like air wingers, but that guy didn't like me. And I ran into him about 3 months before I got out. I was in a chow line someplace. Here I was, a sergeant, and he had been assigned to some station. I don't know why. A lot of these guys, they got assigned to the air wing as barrack sergeants and things like that, guard sergeants. Well, anyway, I ran into him when I was a sergeant, and we made each other. We're in the same chow line, and when I saw him and he saw me, he knew who I was, and I knew who he was. We both made each other. And here I was a sergeant. I wasn't a private anymore that he could choke. All right? This is my therapy to talk about this. This is my Memorial Day, okay? But getting back to Larry Capetto, today's video I watched was all these guys that were mistreated, spit on. And you couldn't talk to them. They all admitted, like, I knew when I got out, the last thing you wanted to do was put on a uniform and go anywhere. You're looking for a fight. I got out in May of '72. You put your uniform on, go out and go anywhere, you're going to be getting in a fight with somebody. And everybody that came after me, like I said, that group that's 70 years old and younger right now, that never had to worry about selective service, never had to worry about the draft, they didn't want to hear about it. So you couldn't reminisce or talk about your service because it's old news. You were baby killers, all right? Very unpopular war. So we don't want to hear your shit. So for 30 years, I held it in, 30 or 40 years. And we weren't, when I got out, I wasn't saying Semper Fi to everybody. And I wasn't waving a flag. Nobody was waving a flag. Nobody took pride in their service. We weren't allowed to, okay? So I kept it in for like 30 years. I got busy. I went to college. I put like 3 years into college. I got in the casino racket. I was dealing cards, dealing craps, and you didn't tell anybody you were in. A few people, close people, you'd share while I was in the Marine Corps, but as far as brandishing it or bragging about it or wearing it on your chest, nah. It's better you just keep it buried. And I want to tell you, I was doing okay in Reno. I'd been in Reno. I'd been out about 4 or 5 years, maybe a little longer. What really brought it all back to me was, and that affected me, was when I saw the movie Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now really messed my head up. Here I'd been out of sight, out of mind for years, all this shit. And when I saw that movie, I couldn't get it off my mind for about a week. all I thought about was that movie. It brought it all back. And I was never in Vietnam. That's the thing. I never made it to Vietnam, but I served with Vietnam people. That squadron I went to in Iwakuni, everybody was just recently in Vietnam. And that fellow, the picture I was taken with, he'd been in Vietnam. So I served with people in Vietnam. I dealt with what they were dealing with. I dealt with what they brought home from Vietnam. I had supervisors that were Vietnam vets. Okay? So I was immersed in it. Even though I didn't go there, I knew what they were thinking. Now, where I am now, we're in Memphis, Tennessee, and we're going to go through these pictures. This is the tip of the iceberg. I've got so many pictures. Everybody bought a camera in Japan, okay? But these are 3 instructors from Memphis in avionics. This is Sergeant Heath. I don't remember his name. I remember him. But this might have been like Memorial Day of 1969. Memorial Day 1969. Okay? We had a party picnic out at this lake in Memphis. Okay? That's one of our guys. I forget his name. I think his name was he had a Teutonic last name. He was from Wisconsin. He was German name. I can't remember what it is now, but that's him and his wife. That's me and a good friend of mine at the lake. That's another guy. A lot of these pictures that are turned sideways, when I loaded them, I can't turn them without screwing anything up. But this was a guy who was married, and this guy and the other guy, they all wanted to go. When we got out of A school, the people who scored the highest got the first bid of where they wanted to go. And here again, these are instructors. I think it was Memorial Day, and we had a break, so they decided we were going to throw a party at the lake. And I think this guy ended up in Iwakuni. While we were there, they brought him over, and he was one of our, because he was an instructor, they sent him over, and he was with us. Because they're all moving. This guy's name was Lipinski. And I never understood these guys that wanted to be married and be in the Marine Corps. That's me in Memphis. Another one, me in Memphis. That's me with this, like I said, a couple of these. There's Lipinski and his wife. That's me right there, behind some instructors. There's Lipinski. I think that's his wife. Me, the instructor. Another, my friend. We were in a ski center in Japan. While I was in Japan, we went on a ski trip. We rode trains for about 4 or 5 hours up into the mountains at Mount Dyson. And this is one of the guys that was in my barracks and went on the ski trip with us. And we were sitting at the bar with Japanese that some of them never seen an American before. We went deep into the interior to get away from the base to go skiing. This is Sachiko, this girl that I knew. She was a friend of ours. We all went to, there's Lynn again and myself. We went on a trip to Kintai Castle. That's Sachiko and myself. And Kintai Castle, there's a zoo around there, and we were feeding the deer. Here I am with her again. And that is Mr. Robert Hastings, the Load. What a character this guy was. What a character this guy was. This guy had a sense of humor. He was from Greer, South Carolina. I think Sumter or Greer, South Carolina. He was all South Carolina, but the NCOs, the people above, loved him. They loved him. And we loved him too because he was he was a character. Okay? We loved him. Everybody loved him. And this guy right here, Copy, he was from Detroit. He was a Gordie Howe fan. This guy was one of the best radar technicians we had. He was like my friend. He had been in Vietnam. He rotated out of there. But this guy really knew the radar. He was from Detroit. He was sharp. He was sharp. He really took an interest, a technical person, a professional, a real professional. This is my friend Ken. When we got to staging, he had started out in the navigation program for the C-130. I think he was in Pensacola. And navigation school, they have a lot of people wash out of navigation school. It's like you got to be a mathematician. You got to be in another consciousness to be a navigator. So he went to navigator school and he kind of washed out of that. So the next step down was being a radar technician, and they made him a radar technician. This is my buddy in the rack. There's Copy again. Like I said, this guy was a leader. He was a leader. He didn't waste time. You talk about somebody that was into fixing radars. He was aggressive. That's JJ Lalakata from Milwaukee. One of the coolest people I've ever known in my life. Just cool. One of the coolest guys you'll ever want to meet. And he was, I think, in Vietnam too. He was one of the guys that was in Vietnam. And he was also in Beaufort with me. When I got to Beaufort, he had rotated out of Iwakuni and he got to Beaufort and got out of Beaufort about 2 months before I did, 3 months. But we were in Beaufort together for a few months, about 6 months. Because they sent him there, and when I got there, there he was, and here I'd known him for the whole year. This guy was in our barracks. He was quiet, kept to himself, but he got into our group after a while. He was taken into our group and made part of our family. Okay, this is in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. They had these girls in bikinis were running up to the cockpit. When the planes would pull up, these girls in bikini would run up with a Mai Tai in their hand and a lei, and they'd put the lei on the cockpit, on the pilot, and give him a big hug and kiss. But they had a whole group of these girls for the pilots. When the pilots came in and landed, they had a band, they had all kinds. And this is a C-130. I rode on this plane all the way from Japan to the United States with a set of Mickey Mouse ears, sleeping under this tank. I had a little bed where I padded and I could sleep under this fuel tank. But this tank was an air-to-air refueler, a C-135, and its job was to refuel. So what they would do is they would drop. I was in the forward group, and I think this is Hawaii. I think this is Kaneohe Bay, because the tails, they took the markings off the tails and they're filled with tanks. So they had wing tanks and a center tank. These were long trips over the open water, so they had all the fuel storage they could have on these planes. And here we are. This is Wake Island. We had to stop at Wake Island for about 3 days, and I got to see Wake Island, where the Marines had that Yeah. Or that might have been Wake Island where those planes were. Those planes, that might have been taken on Wake Island. But this is the group of guys that we were a small contingent. Anybody that had anybody with like less than a month left in Iwakuni or a month and a half, they put them on this detail to take 2 squadrons, about 40 airplanes, from Iwakuni back to the United States, to Fighter Town. What's the name of it? It's Miramar, Fighter Town, San Diego. But here we are at a statue on Wake Island. This was a memorial, and here it is. They got a plaque on it. I'm having trouble seeing, so I won't try to read it, but that was a memorial on Wake Island. And here's me and a bunch of guys. This is when we left Iwakuni. Every one of these guys was part of the detachment. These all were part of the group that, like I said, that small detachment. And this guy was in our barracks, Bob Ferenzi, was from Amsterdam, New York. I lived with him for almost a year in that barracks, but he kept to himself. He went out in town a lot. He didn't talk to us a lot. He was in seat shop. So I never really got to know him. He wasn't part of our group. I mean, you could be 50 feet away or 40 feet away if you had your own little family down in this corner. And like I said, but during that deployment of bringing those 2 squadrons back, I really got to know this guy, and I fell in love with him. He was the greatest guy, the coolest, one of the nicest guys. And from being from Amsterdam, New York, and that's me, and this guy right here, I loved him. He was the greatest guy. Another guy, I think he was from Ohio or Midwest. That's Bob right there. We were on Wake Island. We put on our civilian clothes. We were there for 2 days. So him and I paired up because we were both New Yorkers. We were both drinkers. He smoked, I smoked. There's the Goonie Birds in Midway. We stopped at Midway. There's a group. Delode, Ricky French, myself, Gary. That was my family. Here I'm on Wake Island again. And here coming into Kaneohe Bay is the F4s. That's Kaneohe Bay. And they brought them in. That might have been me right there. Maybe that's me. I don't know. Or somebody like me. But that's the day that we dispatched to go back to the States. And you can see every plane's got 3 tanks. It's got 2 wing tanks and a center tank. And they didn't paint the tail. What they did before they sent them home, they took all the markings off the tail for them. That might be Wake Island right there. There they are, all waiting to take off the next day. Kaneohe Bay again, coming in. There's one that day. There's a starter unit. That's your air starter unit. I think this was in Iwakuni. Yep. Yeah, it was something. Those airplanes were really something else. Those F4s. Okay, here I am on Wake Island. Me and Bob Friends. I don't know if we rented a car or how we got around. But we got around the island. We all went all over Wake Island. We found this gun position. Here we are waiting to take off. There's Bob, this guy right here. Saw him every day, don't know who he is. This guy right here, like I said, he was a crack up. He was an instigator, provocative, you name it. Here I am on Wake. Another gun position on Wake Island. There's a round right there by my feet. See the round they got? The shell. They're in front of a pillbox on Wake Island. We had about 2 days to wait on Wake Island. Okay? And I even got to go swimming there. We were swimming at like 2 in the morning. And you couldn't believe it. Just warm, beautiful ocean breeze going over this warm island. You look up, the sky is filled with stars. What a night we had swimming there one night. There's Bob on top of another pillbox. This was Guam. This is the only, we stopped in Guam to refuel and they dropped the back of the thing and I got a picture out of Guam. I think that's a Continental airplane right there. That's the only part I saw of Guam. We were just there long enough to refuel. And here we are. I think this is Iwakuni. This was the home squadron in Iwakuni. I got pictures of it. That was their home base. Because they had markings on the tail. Here we are dispatching, like I said, that was during when we brought all these planes home. And like I said, they all had wing tanks and center tanks, putting as much fuel on them as they could because they had long hops. This is Kaneohe Bay. When they came in, they'd come in and peel off, come in to land. Here's a torpedo on Wake Island. Right here, that's a torpedo. And here we're in Hiroshima. I got to know this bar girl, and I talked her into taking me to Hiroshima. So we went by train to Hiroshima, about an hour, I think, by train one day. And we went up to, and that's the museum. I didn't want to go in it. I was warned there's a lot of stuff that's hard to watch in there about the bombing. It might be disturbing to you and her, so I avoided it, and plus it might have been a time thing. But this is Peace Park in Hiroshima. Like I said, and this was one of the last buildings standing in Hiroshima after the bomb because it had a dome roof. That dome dispersed. And here's our group. This is my family. These are all people that lived in my barracks, and this was Club Jackie's. Club Jackie's was where 334 avionics hung out. Or 334. People from our squadron. And this lady right here, I'm sure she retired early. Her name was Mayako. Everybody, she had more guys going. She could have 10 or 15 guys going in the bar at night buying her drinks. She'd come over, sit down for you for a couple of minutes. She was gorgeous. She was beautiful. Here's another lady in a kimono. But that was our bar, and they had a drink called a Kiss of Fire. It was like a beer mug with about 4 kinds of Japanese liquor in it. It was like almost like a Long Island iced tea. It was called a Kiss of Fire. I think it was like only about 150 yen, which was like 40 cents, 40 or 45 cents. But that was where we used to hang out, and that's Kintai Castle right there. And these are ferry boats that they have a shrine, this Miyajima shrine. It's halfway between Iwakuni and Hiroshima on the train route. So you take the train up there, you get off, and you have to take these ferry boats out to Miyajima, and it's a shrine. Okay? And on holidays or special occasions, the women all dress up in kimonos. It's really something. It was something to experience. And this is a torii. I'm standing underneath a torii on Miyajima. That's my friend Ken again. And here I'm modeling my new suit. The first thing everybody did is go out in town to these Indian tailors and you ordered a bunch of suits. And these suits were well made. They were lined. They had your name on them. They were, I don't have one left. I'm sure it would fit me. I wish I had them all now. They'd all fit me. That's me in the cubicle. That's Ricky French in the load. That's me throwing a rock up on a Tory. The thing of it is, if you throw a rock up on a Tory and it stays and it doesn't come down, you make a wish, you throw the rock up, if it stays on the Tory, the wish is supposed to come true. And like I said, this is the guy that was a cut-up. I loved him. He was like a brother to me. He was always quick with a joke, quick with a sense of humor, ready to mix it up with anybody. Okay? There I am with a couple of guys that I saw every day. These were family. These were part of the people that were in the squadron. Out in a snowstorm. And there's Ken, this fella. But this guy right here, Bobby Wirtz, what a crazy guy he was. Oh my God, he was from Florida. Him and I went out in town in Okinawa one night, and boy did we we didn't get home until about 9 the next morning. We hit the steam baths and everything like that, but he was a cut-up. Great guy. Type of person that you say, that was a positive. Knowing him in the Marine Corps was a positive because he was such a character. And here, this is the bridge. You had to go over a river to get to Kintai Castle. That was Kintai Bridge. Here, this was taken, looked like in Disneyland when we were stationed in El Toro. These guys were all from the radar shop in El Toro, or avionics. They were all in the barracks, and I got orders cut first to overseas before any of these guys. Okay? But these were avionics people. We were out at Disneyland, I'm sure. These guys, where was this? I don't know where that was. And before Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, all these other bikes really got started here, it was the English who had their bikes. And these were, I think, Triumphs. All the guys, these were guys that got home from Vietnam. Most of these bikes were owned from guys that were in the squadron, like this guy. He was in El Toro. He had rotated back from Vietnam, and he was in the shop with us in El Toro. Oh, damn. But he was a cool guy. And like I said, the Japanese bikes, the Japanese bike revolution hadn't started. I think they had that. There was a Kawasaki. It was a Kawasaki 500 or 600. It had 3 cylinders across. It was a 3-cylinder 500 or 600 cc Kawasaki, and a guy had one of those. But there was a lot of guys. All right. Here, I'll get to a lot of the guys that came back from Vietnam who had served over there that were in my first squadron in El Toro. I got assigned to the squadron right out of A school, right out of Memphis. And these guys had all been in Vietnam. They were salty. They wore their old Vietnam utilities, their Vietnam boots. They wore them like a badge. And they weren't ready for regiment living. Now, here we're in Memphis. This is Matkowski. He was a reservist from Philadelphia. Him and this guy, McCaffrey, were both from Philadelphia. They were reservists. But we're at the pool in Memphis. enjoying, and we, lots of times, the Army nurses or Navy waves or Navy nurses would be at the pool with us. That's my buddy Gary and Sergeant Heath. Sergeant Heath was a character. He grew up in Las Vegas. And he took a liking to me and Gary. That's me in front of the dorms in Memphis. This is Ladies Island, South Carolina. And this is the lighthouse on Ladies Island. I used to go up in that lighthouse all the time. We used to camp out here. I probably camped out on this island 4 or 5 times. We'd go to special services. We'd check out tents and sleeping bags, whatever we need, barbecue equipment. And then we'd spend the weekend out here on Ladies Island. Here's some guys that were in my squadron. I don't remember who they were, but they're just Marines that were. And this guy named Wally. This guy, his butt, that's John Vanderpool. He was from Seattle. Another character. What a character he was. From Seattle, John Vanderpool. He had more stories. And this guy, Wally, was this huge teddy bear. It's a good thing he was. He was the easiest going. Like I said, he was a big, friendly teddy bear. And the reason we taken him to the hospital, we were playing flag football. We had a flag football league in El Toro, and he was out playing flag football one night, and he tore his knee up playing flag football. And here this is avionics school in Memphis. This is where I went to school, probably for about 20-some weeks. There's Matt Kowski, again, the guy from Philadelphia. Boy, did they have some stories. Now, this is our radar class. We had Coast Guard and Navy, so it was a Navy school, so there's, and I took the picture, but there's Lipinski. I don't remember what this fella is. And there's Gary. But we had to go to school with the Navy and the Coast Guard. And there was always more of them. There's Gary and one of the Navy guys again that we made friends with. There was no animosity. We were all in school together. This guy, Wozni, what a character he was. All you'd have to do is say Wolfman to him and he'd put this growl on his face. Anytime. Just walk up to him and go, Wolfman. And he'd go, Rrr! And that's what he was doing. We were all, like I said, this was my family. There's Ken, this guy, and this guy. We all lived in the same barracks together. We did our, and then here's me and Lynn again, my hometown buddy. There's Wozni, the monster man. What a character he was. And there's JJ, Lalakata, Ricky French, and Gary. And here we're in Okinawa. We went here for Okinawa because they wanted to test the guns. Oh, here's another. Our colonel was the coolest colonel. The guy that ran our squadron, Colonel Keast, was one of the coolest, best officers in the Marine Corps. He was a pilot on the F-4. He was just the coolest guy. Well, he organized a ski trip way deep into the interior of Japan. Like I said, it was 5 or 6 hours by train to get there. And we weren't around the base Japanese, the people who serviced the base. These Japanese hardly know what American was. And here, like I said, see what he was a cut up? The guy never knew it was coming. So, and here are the girls in the kimono. This is, again, Miyajima. And this torii right here, when the tide was out, you could go out and stand underneath it when the tide was out. The tide is in right now. So that's why you can't get to it. But when the tide went out, I think I got a picture. These are the ferry boats that would take you from the train station or the mainland out to Miyajima. There's the torii again, and like I said, when the tide was out, you could go stand under it. Now, what you're looking at here are gun pods. We went to we went to Okinawa, and these are missiles, Sidewinder missiles here. But we went to Okinawa to practice shooting guns. The machine guns. You had an option of putting machine guns on the center, where the center tank would go on an F4. You could mount a machine gun. And that's what these are. These are machine gun pods that when we got there, they mounted them on our airplanes, and they pulled a drone, and with colored bullets, you'd go and shoot at a drone that was dragged, say, 500 yards or whatever, 500 feet behind a plane, and they'd shoot at this drone, this canvas drone, and they all had different colored bullets, so they could score your hits by counting a number of, like, say, green or red hits or orange hits to hit that drone. It would show up. And here shows a tail hook down on this one, and this must have been Hawaii. This must have been Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, because they have tail markings. That was or it might have been Okinawa. Could have been Okinawa. That could have been 232 in Okinawa. Okay. Okinawa. Here's all these gun pods. The F4, you could shoot missiles, or you could fire the Gatling gun. It was like a Gatling gun pod. And you could mount it on the bottom of the plane. And they spent all week doing that. So as far as the radar, we did nothing. Radar technicians, we didn't worry about anything, because all they were doing was shooting guns all day, the machine guns. And here we are up on the mountain, Mount Dyson. And here we're in some kind of eatery, train station, or whatever. And it could have been in the eating lounge at the ski center. And that was the dorms, or the sleeping rooms we had at the ski lodge. We had like a bunk bed. And right now, here is, we were waiting in a train station or something. But there's Ricky French right here. That's me. The other guy, he's in a lot of pictures. That guy was in the pictures. This guy, the little guy there with the glasses, and that's Colonel Keast. Like I said, what a great colonel he was. The men loved him. The men loved him. And here we are. I knew Colonel Keast because I talked to him whenever I debriefed him. Because I was a radar technician, I knew all the pilots. Whenever they had a write-up or a discrepancy, I'd be in the operations room when they came in, and I'd debrief him. So I knew him. Him and I were like, it was almost like a casual relationship. He was a full bird colonel, and I was I think I might have been a corporal by then, or lance corporal. But there's Ricky French, 2 avionics. He's radar, I'm radar, right? He's radar, I'm radar. This is Colonel Keast. The rest of these guys, I think this guy shipped when he was over there. This guy might have been a career. He might have shipped over. Here's the little guy I was sitting at the bar with. There's the cut up right there. And the guy, the blonde that got hit in the face with a snowball, must have been the guy taking the picture, because he's not in this picture. He probably took it. There's my friend Gary again. Gary and me again. Ken, this guy right here, I met him on guard duty in Pendleton. And because we were guarding the barracks where people are getting bad discharges, it was the barracks, transient barracks for people who were going to get been in trouble with the Marines and they weren't going to get out with honorable discharge. They were like, had to be watched. So the first time ever, I had to walk double. They made us, because of that situation, who we were guarding, we always had to walk in pairs. So this guy, Ken, and a couple other guys, this guy Pike, and this kid named Skippy, we called him Skippy. I would have to talk to that guy for 4 hours a night for a month. Okay? If I was on rotation with him and I for 4 hours walked together around this barracks. So you got to know him, and Ken was very intelligent. He'd had about 3 years of psychology. He was a psychology major in college before he went in the Marine Corps. So it was a real education to talk to him. I found out what pecking order was. He's the first one that explained to me the pecking order syndrome, where the guy on the bottom always pecks at the guy on the top. Everybody picks down to the person below them until you get to the bottom, and the bottom person says he doesn't have anybody to peck down to. He goes after the person at the top of the pecking order. Things like that. This guy was filling my head with all this psychology shit. It was a real education to walk with him. So, but, and here's he's at the. He got kind of overwhelmed. He was too nice of a guy. He was older than the rest of us. He was probably 4 or 5 years older than me because he had all this college, and that's me after a bad night. I was like that a lot over there. Here we were at Okinawa. This is all of us. Group of us. Again, there's Ken. These guys, they all lived close to us in the barracks. There's me. Ken again on a ferry boat. There he is at the bottom. I told you could walk out to that thing. There he is. He's out standing at the bottom of the tide is out. Sorry I don't have him turned. There's me and him at the bar, Club Jackies. Everybody always had a picture, and there was always people in the bars taking pictures. People running through the bars all the time wanting to take your picture for a little bit. That's me running down the hill. And everybody had, like I said, these T-Act reel-to-reel tape recorder. This wasn't mine. It was my friend. He would let me borrow it, use it. This was the barracks we were in. On the monsoon season, they took and put about 5 or 6 55-gallon drums filled with rock on both sides of this barracks. Filled with rock, 55-gallon drums, and then cables running over the roof of the barracks, because we had a monsoon and they wanted to make sure that the barracks didn't get blown off its foundation. So, like I said, before, when it was coming, they had about 3 days warning it was coming. They put, like I said, 5 or 6 55-gallon drums on each side of this barracks and ran steel cables over the roof in case the wind got so strong it would blow the barracks off. That's Kintai Bridge. I'm up at Kintai Castle. That's Gary and Ricky French fooling around. Here we are on Miyajima, and they used to take squid, the tentacles of squid, fry them and put them on a stick. Like us, we'd have popsicles. They had squid on a stick. Here we're all goofing off. We didn't have any money. I mean, We were lucky we were making $33 every 2 weeks over here. I think I started out over there making like $33 every 2 weeks, and by the time I left it was $42 every 2 weeks. But we had nothing. Okay, we had nothing. We had no money. So that's why we're all together. There we are again in Disneyland, and Wozney's doing his monster. You could get him to do that anytime. Just go monster and buy. Like I said, a real character. This is in Memphis. Gary, and this guy's name that owned this Corvair was George Adams. He was a roommate. This guy was in Beaufort with me. I rode to Key West in his car. He bought a brand new Vega, a Chevy Vega, and we had to get deployed to Key West and we could drive down there. So I rode with him in his car to Key West in this brand new Vega, and they had screwed up the jets and a carburetor. He bought this car, the Vega, thinking he was going to get great gas mileage. The jets were screwed up on the carburetor. He couldn't adjust them. He wasn't getting any gas mileage with that Vega. There's me and the guy again, the cut up. I don't know where he was from. He was like from around Chicago, one of the Midwestern towns. But he was inner city. He was inner city, I think. That's me and Mayako. These girls will take a picture with anybody. Buy them, if you buy them a drink, or if they got credit for selling a drink for them to you. So I had my picture taken, but I never got close to her. There was so many men that were in love with her. She must have retired with a lot of money. She was a doll, a complete doll. There's Gary, like I said, this guy right here, JJ, Ricky Fent. These are some of the coolest people. These were family to me. Family. That's Okinawa. Another party, a beer party we had in Okinawa. And we were all radar. Because we were radar, we didn't have to do anything. They weren't shooting missiles. They were practicing their gunnery with the pods, so we didn't have anything to do the whole time we were there. This guy was a great guy. It's me in front of the Tory and feeding the deer. Deer are sacred. That's me with Kintai Castle behind me. The Kintai Bridge. Me on the bridge with the castle up there. You had to take a tram or an elevator to get to it. There's me feeding the deer. This sweater right here was made in Japan. They took the measurements. I said that I wanted it long to cover my hips. That sweater was ordered and hand knit to my specifications in Japan. It was hand knit by somebody. Okay? To my specifications. I don't know where it is now. All this stuff is gone. There I am again in a cubicle. This guy right here, another part of the family. We couldn't afford to go out and drink. I mean, when you got paid, you got maybe one night out to go drinking with your paycheck, and the rest of the time you were in the barracks because you didn't have any money. You couldn't afford to go out. I mean, these scenes where you see where the bar girls, that's maybe one night a month, one night every 2 weeks. Okay? We just didn't have the money. We were sitting in the barracks all the time. That's why I say these guys become your friend, your family. This is, when I was at El Toro, this is either Laguna or Malibu. It might have been Laguna, but being from, I took this picture because, when you see the hills, the things wash off the hills, this is where it happens. And I went on a ski trip up in Mammoth. There was a guy that was I was stationed with in El Toro. He was from Northridge. And for 2 weeks in a row, or twice, I left him. I spent overnight with him and his family in Northridge. And then him and his friends he grew up with, we'd drive through the Mojave Desert up to Mammoth. And we'd spend a couple of days skiing in Mammoth. This is one of his buddies up in Mammoth, showing off one of the people he grew up with. This might be Okinawa. This is Mount Dyson, the ski center where we were. Here I'm running. I don't know, somebody got a picture of me running. And there are the ferry boats to Miyajima. There's that guy. He was the easiest going guy. That's why he was easy to pull a prank on. That's why when the guy hit him in the face, the guy had no clue it was coming. He was real easy going. That's me in my long underwear caught out in a snowstorm. Kintai Bridge behind me. Me and Sachiko at the base of the Kintai Castle. Had a snowstorm. On holidays, across the fence here was this industrial district for Iwakuni. So that was all civilian, Japan, and on this side was all military. This street right here on holidays was constant traffic of these little Toyota, the first Toyota, the little sedans. They were taxis. This street would be so busy on holidays or days where we had an extra day off. This is where you're at Miyajima departing. There's that guy again. It must have been around Christmas because he's got the Christmas Playboy centerfold right here. But we were living so close. You wouldn't believe. That's me and JJ. Like I said, JJ was from Milwaukee. He was one of the coolest people you'll ever want to meet. All right, he was just, nothing bothered him. I think this was in Iwakuni. And probably during daily operations because there's no tanks on it. Yeah, this was like normal operation. And like I said, there's a C-130. That we had 2 or 3 of them assigned to that trip to go across the country or across the Pacific with the 2. So there was 2 or 3 of these assigned to that mission. That's me and my father at Albany Airport. This is the old days when you were going to go to the airport, you dressed up in a suit, whether you were going to fly or not. All they were doing, taking me back to the airport, but he put a suit and hat on to take me back to the airport. That was the old days, baby boomers. Okay, let's see. I was probably 19. He was born in this is probably 1968. So he was 58 years old. He was 58 years old, almost old enough to be my grandfather. My mother and him started late. There's Ricky and Gary goofing off. There, we're all like together, family. We're all broke. Nobody's got any money. You know, we're sending out for pizza. And we can't go out in town and drink because we don't have enough money. Nobody's making anything. Gotta understand. As far as labor, paying for labor, that Vietnam War didn't cost this country anything. That was our chapel at Iwakuni. You can see the cross on it. I don't think I ever went in it. That's Peace Park. This is Hiroshima. This is one of the only surviving buildings, and it's because it had this dome roof. One of the only buildings to survive in Hiroshima. There's a Torii. The load, like I said, what a character he was. Oh my God. Me and Ricky French. Ricky never skied. He said, well, how you do this? So I got him up on top of the mountain together. We took the lift up to the top. We got off together. We were up there. And I said, just put your skis together and bend your knees and push off. And he did. And he went flying down that hill. I thought he was going to kill himself. I mean, I got to give the guy credit for the courage, but he did. He did exactly what I said. I said, just push off and go, and he did. And he just kept picking up speed. He didn't fall. He was staying up, but man, I think he fell at the end. He hit a ditch or something and took a crash, but I was amazed at the courage of him, because he'd never skied before, didn't know a thing about it. He just went along for the ride. And like I said, this is one of the airplanes that I rode back from Japan on. And this guy right here, nobody knew him. He kept to himself for about 6 months. He just sat on his rack and put his earphones on, listened to stereo, and never talked or had anything to do with anybody. And finally, we started talking to him and found out what a character, what a guy he is, a great guy. That's Ken feeding the deer at Miyajima. And this guy right here, I got a story about him. We were going through staging, and we had a night operation. Okay, first of all, I had to do guard duty with him 4 hours a night for a month. Him or somebody else. We had another guy who was part of our group named Skippy. This guy was the psychology major, okay, who had taken psychology in college. So he had all this intelligence to tell me about that. And then we had this other kid named Skippy. And Skippy was a music major. So when I walked guard with him for 4 hours, all I heard was anything about music. He was, and Abbey Road, the album from the Beatles, Abbey Road, had just came out, and he was so in love with that album. He thought it contained everything. But he's the one that told me so much about music, like what syncopation was, or falsification, where you've got two types of music competing with each other at the same time, like boogie woogie, falsification, simplification. But I talked to him all night about music. I talked to Ken all night about psychology. I mean, you don't know how you can get to know these people. And I'm done. But getting back to Gary Capetto, I'm going through right now, 56 years later, I'm being spit on by my HOA, the Town of Buckeye, in the Arizona court system. I'm being sued by my HOA. They've been fining me $100 a day for the last year and a half, and now I'm being sued. And these are all people, like I said, that never worried about being drafted. That board of directors, they look at me like I'm Andrew Dice Clay. As far as they're concerned, I crawled out of a sewer pipe in front of Yankee Stadium. Okay? They don't recognize my service. I feel like these people that it's back again. And when I tell them I was spent, time in the Marines, and they don't care. They don't care. We see you as a guy that we're going to take down. We have no respect for you. We don't care about your service. We don't like you. You should have been in here in the first place. We don't like California buyers coming in and outbidding local people. And that's exactly what you did. I might as well been a Marine walking off an airplane when I bought these houses here, because when I bought my first house, the first thing they did was sabotage it. They sabotaged my house. They lowered the sewer pipes. They didn't know my background. They didn't know who I was. All they know is we've never seen that name before. He's not one of us. He hasn't knocked. He hasn't shown us a password or given us a password. He hasn't joined the church or anything like that. So as far as we're going to do, we're going to spit on him and lower his foundation of his house. We're going to make him a drain above the 6th hole. Now, I've been trying to get this across to the board of directors and everybody here, even Craig Hustis. Craig Hustis, who was a Marine in Vietnam. At first he helped me. He even turned against me. Like a Hollywood Marine. Okay, you're not a spit and polish Hollywood Marine like us. You're from the inner city of New York. You got that New York vibe to you. I saw it the whole time. Because I was in avionics, when I show you those pictures of people of radar that were in Disneyland, these are all white crackers, like myself. White, okay? White off the farm. And I know, and I used to witness myself, if somebody come into our group, if he was in avionics and he had a New York accent and a New York attitude and he was a little aggressive, everybody would say, they'd look down on him. The same way I'm looked down on in this HOA. They're treating me like you don't belong here. You're not worthy to be here. So, and they're going to try to take thousands of dollars of equity out of me next month in about 2 weeks in court. And nothing I say is going to help me. No matter how much I sacrificed, and I got drafted, and I volunteered for an extra 2 years, over the 2 years I mandatory to give them, and I went through all this, and I got out of the Marine with the same attitude that all these other men got out of. They're spitting on me. I can't wear my uniform. Nobody wants to hear about the service I put in. I'm getting it right now in 2024 here in Buckeye from a weaponized HOA and a bunch of rednecks who run the town of Buckeye. The town of Buckeye, 20 years ago, sabotaged my house. They put a forever encumbrance on the title of my house. It's forever clouded. And they're making a mountain out of a molehill, a tempest in a teapot, because I'm trying to protect my property, because I have experience. I played golf for like 60 years. I know I'm being targeted day in and day out by the golf course with mediocre golf. And I'm trying to do something about it to keep golfers and golf balls out of my yard. And all I'm getting is being sued by people half my age who never worried about being drafted, who are never worried about serving. All right? Like I said, this has been therapy for me. And I'm sure everybody has left a long time ago, but this is only the first. I got an HOA that can't stand me because they think I'm Andrew Dice Clay. You don't belong here. You don't have the bloodline. You're not white enough for us. And because I whistle blew on track day, that's another thing. Not only did they lower my house, but they took this sophisticated plan, and 20 years ago, they mutilated it. They let these people from the Midwest bring their farm with them. That access easement is supposed to be my golf cart path, an emergency access for emergency ingress and egress for emergency vehicles, pedestrians, maintenance vehicles, golf carts. They took it out of service. The Craft of Graft. They did a Trump, the art of the deal 20 years ago. I've been paying tribute to my neighbors that live on each side of Tract A for 19 years. And the way they thank me for my service out here 56 years later is to let a couple of young lawyers half my age fry me in court. And to get in there with a judge who's going to have a blueprint that says, we have to do it this way. I can't listen to your story. I can't listen to your sabotage story. I can't listen to them, how they stole your easement. It's not on the lawsuit. I have to stick to the blueprint. And they're going to take all kinds of money out of me. Not only did they spit on me or not have anything to do with me when I got out of the service, when I got to my hometown, all the young guys that were younger than me, they don't want to hear about the war. We don't want to hear that shit. The war's over. Let it go. Move on. All right? And now, 56 years later, after all the stuff that I've done, I've been working on airplanes for 30 years. I got an FCC license. I got a federally issued FAA power plant, airframe and power plant license. I got a credit rating that's up near 800. It don't matter. You're not one of us. You're not white enough. And you're from the city. And you think we're going to open this up? You're trying to destroy what we built 20 years ago with social engineering. We socially engineered this 20 years ago to give that easement to the people on each side of that forever and ever. Not only am I being sued, I got kicked out of the HOA 7 years ago by a woman that could be my daughter from the UK. She's not even an American. You think she has any appreciation? These are all MAGA Donald Trump types that are suing me. Donald Trump has no respect for anybody on that wall. Everybody on that wall is a loser to Donald Trump. The only people that are the true Americans and true patriots in this country are the people that carried the Stars and Bars Confederate flag into the Capitol. The people who attacked the Capitol. Let me tell you, when I got drafted, I was in this tiny little town. If I went to Canada, I would have shamed my family. My parents would have been shamed. Everybody would have been shamed. Okay? Because everybody knows everybody. So I turned the other cheek. I added 2 years to my enlistment, and I got out with an honorable discharge and an education in electrical engineering. And nobody wants to recognize that. And on June 6th, when I get out of court, I'm going to be walking a lot lighter than I am now. I'm probably going to be having to worry about being evicted because I feel the judge has no choice but to put a judgment against me, which is going to be a judgment against my house. And I'm going to be given a time limit to pay the judgment. And if I don't pay it, they're going to evict me and foreclose on my house because I didn't pay this adjustment. And like I said, I was drafted when they sunk my house and made my lot a retention basin to store water over the golf course and to keep water off the golf course. They drafted me again. And they can't stand it because I found out. You did this to the wrong guy. You're all a bunch of Masons. I grew up in a Masonic household. My father could have been a Shriner. I think he made it far enough that he could have been a Shriner. And I asked him, I said, how come you didn't go to being a Shriner? He says, it costs a lot of money to be a Shriner. It costs a lot of money to be a Shriner. I don't want to spend the money. Okay? But I know Masonry. I know what they do. They're secretive. They pull deals like this in the secret. They put that deal together. They took track day out of service. They gave it to these two bucolic farmers that wanted to bring their farm with them. And now, 56 years later, I'm going through the same deal I went through when I got out of the Marine Corps in 1972. Nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody wants to recognize my service. All right? And you're all looking for money from me. I spent the last 8 or 10 years working on my lot every year, trying to get degraded. It was sabotaged, booby-trapped. Nobody will list my house. No realtor will list. And now that I've got $60,000 worth of fines against my house and a lawsuit on top of that, okay, there isn't a chance. I can't sell the house. They're social engineering this corner over there. We don't want you there. We don't give a shit about your service. You mean nothing to us. I'll tell you what, I got a feeling, and I'm going to make a prophecy. I'm going to say if Donald Trump gets president, that one of these days, him or one of his goons are going to say, why don't you just fill in that wall there? All that wall does is remind me of what a coward I was during Vietnam. And I don't recognize anybody on that wall for being a patriot. I recognize them all for being losers. So let's take and bring in a couple thousand yards of dirt and just bury that wall, and we'll put a monument to Ivanka or something, make a statue of Ivanka or somebody like that. Or me. Put a statue of me on top of after we bury that wall. I don't need anybody to remind me of what a coward I was during Vietnam. Now, no, we don't want anybody to ever bring it up. And as far as I'm concerned, we lost that war. And I don't want to have any symbol of the United States losing a war. So cover it up. Bury it. Let's put these Vietnam veterans to rest. Like I said, I never made it to Vietnam. In lots of ways, I had a country club existence. But a lot of people, I served with people that made it. And I have friends that are on that wall. I've been to that wall. And I got friends on it. About 4 people from my hometown that I knew personally that are on that wall. Thank you for the therapy.